if you're curious about anything we say that references previous sessions, you can look there and find what we're talking about. Christina, on to you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Christina Rowe, and my work focuses on building collaborative leadership skills within individuals that then in turn help with team development and organizational development. What that looks like in times of crisis is helping people get heard and supported, and really lean on how do you use those collaboration skills to make a better environment.
And Danny, I think it's back to you now. Christina, can people hear?
Mm-hmm. Danny,
Yes.
Oops, can you hear me now?
Now we can. There you go.
Better,
There we
much
go.
better. All right, so there you go. So thanks for your patience with that. We're still working through some of the technical glitches. We're like you. So before we get started, we wanted to recap on some of the work that we've done. So just by way of reminder, this is part 4 in a 6-part series. As Lisa said, all the materials are available for the sessions that we've covered already. But just by way of a quick recap, wanted to remind you of some of the things that we've discussed in the previous 3 sessions. So the first is, as you're thinking about, as we're working through leading through crisis and how this crisis and this situation that we're in right now continues to evolve and develop, there are some things that we know are absolutely true. One of those is to, for you as a leader, as a manager, to continually define reality. Continually define reality. So every time that you get together with your folks, we suggest that you start off with a reality check and say, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, this is what we're planning on. For that purpose, people become more grounded and they're tethered to something that, as you get started with the what we don't know conversation. So always start with what you do know. Secondly is that people are looking for 3 things. They are looking for safety, predictability, and control. So to the extent that you can provide that, you can give people information so that they know that they are secure perhaps in their jobs to the extent that you can, and the work that they'll be doing, that's predictable to the extent that you can predict it, and whatever you can do to allow people to exercise their own agency and control in this work. That's what people are looking for when they're navigating this different kind of time, this challenging time. Third is we want to make sure that we're encouraging you to address unmet needs. So what do we mean by that? So we mean that oftentimes what they say that they need isn't always necessarily what the real baseline unmet need is. So we often find that when people are looking for safety, control, and predictability, it's to meet an emotional need. So whatever you can do to understand what that emotional need is, that would be very beneficial. In fact, we know that some of the core unmet needs that tend to come up for people over and over again are their control, being in control, being successful, being respected, safety, balance, and recognition. So start thinking about what is the question behind the question? What is the need behind the need? Our fourth is compassion versus empathy. So the difference there is that we're looking at empathy as a necessary relationship that you have with folks, but that tends to come from a place of sorrow, right? So I feel for you and we're in this place of being sad and challenged together. Compassion on the other hand, is coming from a place of warmth and helpfulness and action. So moving towards delivering on the sadness that you have or the challenge that you have, but in a way that says, let me help you. Let me figure out how to best help you. And then lastly, just want to highlight that we covered 5 tools to understanding and working with conflict. That is one of the downloads, so we encourage you to download that. It's a great PDF that Lisa and her team have put together. And I won't go into those 5 tools, but it's great, good meaty stuff for how to leverage conflict during this time when molehills can become mountains just by the flick of a switch. So today what we're going to be doing is covering resiliency and innovation. We'll continue with this next week, but we wanted to continue with the resiliency conversation that we were having last week and move into innovation. So before we get into that, real quickly, our guidelines, our group shared guidelines, we have 5 simple ones. The first is confidentiality. Anything that happens in this room that stays in this room when it has to do with a person, place, or activity. API is assume positive intent. Always remember where things are coming from, whether it's coming from me or anybody else in the room. Adapt, not adopt. Make sense of the tools and the insights and the advice that we're providing to you, but you don't have to adopt it 100%. Take what works for you and leave the rest behind. 4th is the wisdom is in the room. We really want to encourage you to share your wisdom with us as we're sharing our research and our wisdom with you. And 5th is that corollary of step in and step up. So we're going to do something a little bit different this week than we've done in weeks past. In weeks past, we've actually asked you to step up into volunteering and to have some group coaching. And we're going to try something a little bit different this time. So I don't want to give away too much, but just know we're going to ask you to step in and step up in a different kind of way that's a little bit more intimate. So just be ready for that. It's coming soon.
Okay, thank you, Danny. So we're going to step back and, as we have every week, and talk a little bit about the crisis curve. For folks who are new to us, new to this series, there's a whole recording on the crisis curve itself. But basically, the idea is that people go through phases during crisis, and that the longer the crisis goes on, the more you see people's behavior change. And just to contextualize where we are sort of in a broad swath as a country, the average is we've been through this process where there was a crisis, we responded, there was heroic action, then the crisis continued, we sort of settled in, people became perhaps depressed or started acting out. Certainly we've seen people resisting shelter in place requests or orders. We've seen an increase in domestic violence, those kind of things, more arguments at work. That's the kind of acting out you would expect sort of in the depression, acting out trough. And now we're moving into this phase as a country, and definitely it's staggered and different from place to place, but in general moving into a place where we're really reconciling what life looked like pre-crisis and what it'll look like post-crisis, and leaning into a phase that we call reconstruction. And during that phase, the things that are really critical in order to continue to move yourself forward, your organization and your teams, which is why we're all here, is really focusing on resiliency, continuing to build resiliency and innovation. And so that's what we're going to really focus on today with you. And so as Danny mentioned, we already talked about sort of the baseline or foundation that's necessary for resiliency. And I tend to think of that as, nothing happens. You can't build resiliency without those things. And the pieces we're going to talk about today are sort of like the summit, or the icing on the cake, if you will. So the first thing is that we find to be helpful for people in terms of building resiliency is having a strategic view. And by this, we mean sort of that ability to step back from the immediate, the emergent, the crisis, and sort of see the larger picture. And even flashing on the crisis curve and where we are in the crisis curve is a good example of having a strategic view. Related to that also are helping people on your team and yourself find hope and inspiration and even potential for growth. So a really quick example of that might be a question that we use with clients, which is when something's really hard, think of 3 things that might come out of this crisis or this hard news or this hard turn of events that wouldn't have been possible before. It's a really good example of just pivoting, using the current circumstances and pivoting to look at where the hope is or where the positives can be. The third is micro boosters. We tend to think of we can't do self-care, can't do things that give us pleasure during crisis because there's so much going on. And the truth is what we do to restore our energy throughout the day has to be different. That's all. It's like little tiny touches of things that give you energy. And it can be everything from organizing your day so that you get the thinking time early morning if you're a morning person, to having a checklist that you can cross off things and have that satisfaction, to I do this a lot, having 20 seconds of just mindfulness, turning off my thoughts and just really absorbing sound, light, texture, smell while I'm washing my hands every day. It gives me an incredible amount of energy to sort of be in the world rather than the 2D reality that we're living in. All of us are living in right now. Other things we've heard from clients is people giving their folks, their teams time off for self-care. break an hour early on Friday, so on and so forth, that kind of thing. And somebody even mentioned they have a pandemic playlist, a list of music that makes them happy, and they listen to that during the day. So really tiny little things you can do throughout the day that give you energy and sort of feed you. Another a fourth thing we talk about quite a bit is really working with ego, and we're about to talk about that in more depth on the next slide, actually. And so when people talk about ego, I think we tend to associate this idea that ego means I think I'm really good at something. And that's not really what ego is. It's sort of like the cartoon idea we have in our head about ego. But what ego means is that your sense of importance outsizes reality. And the truth is, we probably all have a little bit of ego all the time. If you were to watch your thoughts for a day as you walk around, you're thinking about your to-do list, you're thinking about almost everything that crosses your mind is about you. And the truth is, we're one of billions of people in the world, and we're really not that important. And so to some degree, you could say that we all sort of have an outsized ego. The reason this is a problem during crisis is three things, really. First of all, having that sense of not being able to accomplish the normal things you do during your day, things being up in the air, all causes a little bit of a crisis that actually causes our ego to get larger. And if we have a tendency to have a self-critic, that gets larger too. And so what can happen is, first of all, it's not a really good place for coming up with innovation or for thinking or even reflecting or hearing other people. So it's one of the reasons we want to work on our ego. The second is it's really exhausting to walk around thinking that the weight of the world and the what happens with the world is in large part due to us or is connected to us making the right decisions. And if we can right size our sense of importance, that takes a lot of pressure off us. And so there's a few things we can do to do that. That are really helpful, easy things. So first of all, the big picture, and we talked about that, even flashing on the crisis curve can help you think about the big picture, or the big picture about what you're about in your life, what's important to you, what your goals are, what sort of your personal mission statement is, all of those things. Thinking about humility, and humility is one of those things people talk about, but we don't really talk about how to be humble. And so a few concrete things I have found, and I need to practice this more, absolutely. One is trying to ask more than telling people. A second is surrounding myself with people who challenge my assumptions or who have different beliefs and different assumptions so that there's a bigger perspective. And then the third is just reminding myself that I can't possibly have all the answers. And so I really need to continue to learn. So those are all good examples of things that help with humility. Attending to your inner critic is really important. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. One of the simplest things we've talked about in the last few weeks is just noticing your inner critic. Most of us carry an inner critic around in our head all the time. They become incredibly loud when things are unclear, when we feel like things are topsy-turvy. And it's really helpful to just notice that critic, not try to solve it, not try to shut them down, not try to make them go away, but just notice and see how often they come up. And what happens is you give your brain the ability to separate out from those messages. You literally create a barrier and you see the critic instead of being succumbed or sort of overcome by the critic. A fourth thing, connecting with others can help with the ego, and there's lots of examples we've heard from people over the weeks about how they're doing that. It's everything from virtual coffees with friends or with people on their team to having walk-in talks. We heard of one case where people are dropping off meals to former colleagues who were furloughed from the organization, writing handwritten notes. And as follow-up to this session, actually, we're going to send out 20 questions that is a tool to help create a really strong connection with people and sort of shake up what you think about, about each other and sort of the way you relate to each other. And then finally, the last thing is really approaching attitude or situations with compassion and gratitude. Expressing your gratitude for what people bring to the table, for what you have, anything you can do to experience gratitude and compassion for others who may not be in the same situation definitely puts your ego in the right perspective.
I caught myself that time. So we wanted to go into some more strategies for what we know work for continuing to increase our resiliency. And one of those is innovation. But before we get to that, I just wanted to call out a couple of things that Lisa said that might be useful. Yes, so we're going to send you these 20 questions that actually speak to how to, the kinds of questions that actually help build hope, which is exactly what Lisa was talking about. And I want to give credit where credit is due. These are 20 questions that came from an article that was referred to me from Inc. magazine. So you'll see that. Secondly, actually, Emily just private messaged me. I hope you don't mind my calling you out, Emily, and talking about tamingyourgremlin.com, which I know is a great resource, a great book, and a great resource. And I wanted to throw out one other resource, and I'll type that in just a moment, and it's called positiveintelligence.com.
Absolutely.
So there's some great work, some great work that Lisa and Christina and I are fans of from Shirzad Chamine, and he has this great body of work called Positive Intelligence, hence the name of the website. But there's an assessment, a free assessment called your Saboteur Assessment that I highly encourage you to take. I use it with most of my clients. In fact, a bunch of you on this call have probably taken it. And it's a great way of understanding those things that Lisa was talking about. Those are your own saboteurs that you can name out, call, and start to tame. Whether we call them a gremlin or a saboteur, they're there for all of us. All right, so all that aside, let's move into innovation. So we wanted to discuss the importance of innovation, but we realized that's, it's one argument for us to tell you it's important, but we'd rather hear it from you. So let's take a minute, and in the chat box, would you mind telling all of us, why do you think innovation is an important quality, an important skill as we're thinking about how to navigate crisis and recovery? Why is innovation important? So go to your chat and tell us, why do you think it's future looking, asset-based, new situation requires new strategies. Normal will not match the before picture. So, yep. Different part of your brain, forward moving, growth, excellent. New ideas, new situations, excellent. Thank you all. Good. So I'm guessing we don't have to create a very compelling argument. You get it, right? So now is the time when situations are different that we need to be different. So we're going to talk more about what that takes to change yourself, but we want to talk about what are some good, easy things that you can do right now to start to work your innovation brain. So our second question for you is, what are examples of innovation that have inspired you, that you've seen, maybe that you've done on your own or that you've seen in other organizations or with other colleagues? What are some examples of innovation that you've seen or heard about or have been curious about? And if you could put that in chat, that would be terrific. We'll give you just a minute. Again, what are examples of innovation? Novel vaccines, people sewing masks, indeed. Virtual church services, arts organizations figure out how to perform together. I love that. Moving to Zoom. The Met Opera Gala, yeah. Masks from t-shirts, a lot of masks, yeah. Celebrating birthdays on Zoom, window visits in senior homes, that's right.
Nice.
So you see what's happening, what's capturing your attention. It's the same thing that we want to encourage you to capture your attention, but also the folks that you lead, whether it's your clients, your teams. Innovation is a way of capturing folks' attention and pivoting to a different kind of reality. So some examples that work for me are one of the things that I've really been settling on this week is this notion of we're in a two-dimensional world. So much of this, all our interactions are screen to screen. And what can we do to bring more three-dimensionality into our 2D world? So one of the things that I'm trying to do and want to encourage you to think about is, can you send out a card, a handwritten note, a little care package to your folks so that they can engage with you in a three-dimensional way in this 2D world? And I want to say, I got this idea from my gym. I belong to a very small community-based gym. In fact, Emily's a part of that too as well. And all of a sudden we get this package in the mail with a t-shirt, sage, and a candle, and just a note saying that we're thinking about you. So that engagement in a 3D world, in a 3D way and a 2D world is one really, I think, a solid example of innovation. So if you're not innovative, we want to encourage you to start thinking about how you can be innovative, because we all have this in us. And the way we want you to be thinking about that is to concentrate on 3 different steps. The first step is knowing your client. This can be the client who receives your services from your organization. It could also be your team. So whoever you are in service to, first to know your client, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Secondly is to engage in active dialogue. We'll talk about that as well. And then thirdly is to change you. So when we're talking about knowing your client, we'll just go to the next, there we go. So a few things that we want to stress with you when you're knowing your clients. And the first is the reality of knowing your client right now. What are their needs right now during the crisis? So the first is that they have a need to trust you. Again, whether you're a manager, a leader, or we're talking about your clients, they want to be able to trust you in this new reality. So are you safe? Are their services providing? Are they safe? Can I count on you? All those kinds of things. This is the time when people are feeling the most in need to have entities and people and situations that they can trust. Second is to make sure, and you've heard us say this over and over again, folks want to be seen, heard, and valued. It's very simple. It happens before the crisis, it'll happen after the crisis. It's the core need for folks in organizations. It's not always about problems being solved. Mostly it's just about being seen, valued, and heard. Third is stability, this notion of how can I control things? How can I know that what I'm expecting to happen will happen to the extent possible? You want to do that. And then fourth, that Lisa talked about, that we're going to continue to talk about, it's actually one of the pillars of happiness and positive psychology, is that folks need to have a sense of hope. So that's what folks need right now. So think about those things as you're thinking about how to innovate, how to pivot, how you might introduce something novel and interesting in a way that will actually meet these needs. And then it's important, as Lisa said, we have to start thinking about what reopening or reconstruction means. So I know different people, different parts of the country, different organizations, we're all over the map on this, but now is the time to start thinking about these things. So for reopening, the needs change just a little bit, and we start thinking about things like safety. So again, we've talked about this before, but people want to feel like they, and your clients, your folks, that they are coming into a safe environment. So we want to make sure that we structure whatever that new environment is, that new scenario, that people feel safe. It's a basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We start with safety. Second is that sense of interpersonal connection, right? Coming back into a community, whatever that community is. And third, we want to make it as seamless and easy as possible so that people can come back to a new reality, a new connection, without having to jump through 500 hoops. So if we can bring that down to 350 hoops, we're doing our job as a leader, right? We may not get rid of all of them, but we want to make it as easy as possible.
Thanks, Danny. That's great. And so how do you start that? How do you start bringing down those barriers? How do you start making it really easy? The first piece is to make sure that you're building your understanding of your clients, that you're finding ways to really understand how were they affected by COVID, what has been that long-term impact. That can be by initiating a two-way active dialogue, right? Are there ways that you're reaching out to your clients before your state is reopening to kind of say, great, we need to know where you are now. We need to know what's going on in your life, or inviting them into the discussion for, you know, what are their concerns ahead of time, if possible, and hearing from them and starting that dialogue where you get to actually learn from the source. And asking them along those lines and creating that guiding of what's your priority. Some of those pieces within safety may be huge for some populations. Thinking about if you work with an elderly population or an aged population, that's a very high risk and fear area for a lot of people still. they're gonna want to be reassured of, things like how are you keeping facilities clean? How are you minimizing their exposure points? And so ask them, what are your biggest concerns about as we're moving into this, and what is a priority for you? They may also be chomping at the bit to get back into a clinic for something that's been bothering them, or to be, to get back to certain services that really helped improve their quality of life because they're feeling it right now. So this all gives you the chance to be able to have that active dialogue back and forth where you're giving them buy-in. You're giving them the opportunity to be part of the solution so that upon reopening, you're able to invite them into a solution they helped make. Whenever we can create more buy-in and more interactions like that, people are going to feel higher ownership of, they listened. That was that seen and heard that we talked about. And they're going to feel a part of it. It's also much harder for any of us to tear down something we feel like we helped build, or something that we felt like we had input on. So the more that those individuals are feeling seen and heard in the solutions of the way that you approach your reopening or increasing interactions in the long term, that's going to make them feel more a part of what you've built, and they're going to feel more confident in it along the way. So, and then don't be afraid to change you. We're moving into a place where we have never been before in our world. We've never gone from this shut down place to moving into, a whole reopening from this crisis across the whole country and across the world. And so think about, these are the pieces that you need to look at from a different perspective, because this isn't going back to normal, it's going to a new normal. And so some of those behaviors and some of those rules and boundaries that might have been in place may need to shift. Not the federal ones probably, but the ones where you do have flexibility within your organization. Think about, how can you empower staff? Can they have the flexibility to make judgment calls on some bigger, pieces than they ever did before, because they've walked through this with you and they're going through the same paces of getting to know and understand what clients are going to need. So can you give them that kind of freedom to help influence? Again, giving them that chance to buy in and have ownership over it. And then identify what those shifting needs are and what are the barriers that can be expected. We heard that safety was really important to our client population. And so the way we're going to have to do that is, if they have a barrier where maybe they're not on email, and so they didn't read that email we sent out that said, we clean our space 3 times a day. We actually close from 1 to 2 for a full deep clean every day. Then post it in your office. So on their way in the door, they see it and they have a reminder of, oh, that's great. I feel a little better now, right? Think about creative ways you can communicate. And at times, it may feel like over communicating, but you have to remember, some people are maybe seeing it for the first time, or they're hearing it from your team members for the very first time. So over communicating when we're going back into something that's so different and where there's so many fears and needs that need to be met is really important. Prioritize. What's going to be the highest demand? Who's going to need your services first? And can you do things like maybe a slow open to only this first service, so that you're minimizing how many people are in and out, or you're able to space better, or pieces like that. A lot of organizations are not going to be able to go back to just full-fledged how they ran before, right? They're going to have to narrow services. And this is actually one of those pieces where there's a huge innovation opportunity, because you also have the opportunity to innovate those services to something new, or cut some of the pieces that weren't serving you or serving your clients that well. Maybe there were ones that can become something different or can be served by a different approach. These are all pieces of what we'll spend quite a bit more time in next week, just as a little preview of strategic innovation, which will be fun and creative and also give you some freedom to create wiggle room for the future of your organization as well, because maybe you're not tied into some of those pieces that weren't really serving you before. So now is our time to do some sharing. We're going to move into breakouts, and this is going to give us an opportunity for everyone to be able to really talk about what are those possible scenarios that your organization might be running into and might be seeing as the time comes for everyone to go back to their new normal. And remember that this new normal is going to continue to change. So this is an exercise to cycle back through when you get the opportunity to go back and say, okay, now in the next stage, what do we need to think about and what do we need to think about? So you're going to be put into breakout rooms, and there should be about 5 to 6 participants in every room. What I want you to do is first be sure that you are picking who is going to be your person to report out when we come back together in about 10 minutes. And that's going to be who we'll call on for each of the rooms to share out what were your aha moments, what were your takeaways. And then, and did you solve anyone's problem? Did they come up with something they're super excited about? And then each of you try to take a chance to quickly share what's one scenario you need to plan for. And how might that look different than that scenario or that service ever looked before in your organization? And have time to kind of discuss it and chat about it, and maybe share ideas. Maybe there's something somebody's already got planned that they can share with you that you can adapt for your organization. All right, so when we go in, you're going to get a little pop-up that's going to say what room you're assigned to, and I'm going to need you to just click join the breakout room. And also be sure that you're looking for across the top of your screen, you'll see communications when we send you a heads up when we're starting to wrap up the breakout, and then you'll get I think it's a 1-minute countdown as a heads up when you're getting pulled out of the breakout room. So we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Go ahead and accept your A and Dane. Be sure that you're accepting the little pop-up to move into the breakout room. And A, if you're there, if you want to go ahead and move to the breakout room. Hi, Camilla. We are we're doing breakouts right now. So I'm going to go ahead and move you into a room. We're going to talk about what are some scenarios and services that are coming up for your clients that they may need a different approach to how you do it to make sure that they feel safe or the way that they're working moving forward. And you should have got a little pop-up that offers you a breakout room. Perfect. I just moved A to the waiting room because I don't think they're paying attention because
Very
they're not.
smart. Yeah, very smart. I didn't think you
And she didn't.
did
Yeah. So if you, I'm gonna stay in this main room, and then you and Lisa can go back and forth into breakout rooms to kind of lead some discussions. One person, the tech person, has to stay out. And
So we'll come out and then you'll put us in another room. All right. So I'll jump into breakout room 6 and spend a couple seconds and then come back. Okay, great.
yeah, and then just do like leave the breakout room.
Mhm.
It'll be in the lower corner, and so then you come out.
Mhm.
I don't know if Lisa remembers that part.
She'll get involved. Yeah, but I like hopping around. Okay.
Yeah,
Sounds
if you
good.
happen to see how the discussion's going, that's great. And every time you come back, just remember the room you were just in,
Yeah.
and I'll put you in another one.
Right
All right,
on.
thanks.
Thanks, Christina.
Oh, that's